What if Renly Baratheon survived? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. If this video gets 3,000 likes, we'll make a part 2. Brienne of Tarth lunges forward, not at the shade, but at Renly Baratheon. She throws him to the ground as the shadowy figure lunges. The blade misses the king and grazes her side. The shadowy sword shears through her armor and slashes across her side. The sound attracts Royce and Emmon, who rush forward with their swords drawn. The shadow snarls and rushes at them, its dark blade whirling as it forces the two knights back. Their blades flash, and it lets out an ear-splitting shriek as it connects with the shadow. And then the shadow slices through their steel as if it were butter. Brienne gets to her feet and rushes into the fight. She stabs her sword directly at its back, but the blade strikes at nothing as the shadow turns into mist and reforms to her face. When Brienne faces it down, her eyes widen as she sees the face of Renly Baratheon. She can only stare for a moment as Emmon jabs a torch into its head. This time, the shadow recoils as it comes into contact with the light. Seeing their success, Royce rips a brazier from the corner of the room and hurls its contents at the shadow. This time, the sound is deafening as the shadow shrieks in agony. The others cover their ears and drop their weapons, but the shadow slowly dissipates, leaving them alone once more. As the air calms down and the darkness seems to leave the room, Renly dusts himself off, pulls himself from the ground, and tries to smile at them.
Well done. It seems I chose my rainbow guard well. Sir Emmon, that was clever thinking with the fire. And Sir Robar, I saw you struck the final blow. But Lady Brienne, I owe you the greatest thanks. If you had not been so quick, I doubt I would be standing here now.
Your Grace, I live only to serve you. But you must know, that creature bore the face of your brother.
Indeed, I am thankful. But Lady Catelyn, surely you must see now what kind of man my brother is. If you think you would do well with him, I suggest you reconsider. Ask yourself, what would ever happen if your son were ever to displease Stannis?
I see the wisdom in your words. Very well. My son will join his strength with yours.
The next morning, Catelyn and her small train of delegates stand atop a nearby hill overlooking the plains below Storm's End. Stannis and his meager host hurry to erect defenses, raising earthworks and digging trenches, but it is hard to see how he can manage a win as Renly assembles his host, nearly 4 times as large, and all cavalry. At the head of his army is Sir Loras Tyrell, raising the king's banner as he prepares a charge with nearly 4,000 men. Once the army finishes reassembling and last-minute terms are declined, a horn is blown, signaling the charge. The Tyrell Rose banner snaps above his head as the Knights of the Reach and Stormlands drop their lances, letting the light wink across their armor as they rush into the Dragonstone forces. Archers and crossbowmen stand on a nearby hill and loose their arrows at the charging knights, as others lower pikes behind their trenches, and the few cavalry Stannis has prepares to attack. But, though not impressive at first, the defenses are more formidable than they seem, as the trenches bog down knights, slowing their charge enough to allow pikemen to hold. Meanwhile, from the hill, the archers stop firing and begin rolling down logs to crush into the galloping cavalry, sowing chaos in their ranks. Some manage to leap over them, but others are crushed or tripped up. Even those who aren't hit are forced to break formation. Loras presses on, shouting for those around him to continue fighting, but the charge is now slowed to a trot that struggles to break the defenses of every camp. Stannis' soldiers, grim-faced and disciplined, rise from their barricades, thrusting spears and pulling knights from their saddles. Horses rear and scream, and the once glorious charge slows into a brutal slog. Loras finds himself unhorsed, scrambling in the mud as enemy footmen close in around him. He fights like a demon, trying to remount and hold off the attackers around him. Even from across the plains, Renly sees this and signals the rest of his army. Thousands of cavalrymen spilled across the field like a great green wave. At their head rides Randyll Tarly, his sword drawn, shouting commands with the cold precision of a veteran. To his flank rides Roland Storm, the bastard of Nightsong, roaring like a lion as he drives his horse straight into the thick of the fray. By now the battle turns into a melee, and here men like Randall and Roland excel. Instead of the tourney knights and inexperienced youths that Loras fights with, these men are professional soldiers, dismounting and wading through the chaos. There is no honor or chivalry in their fighting, simply the grim determination to kill. Under their leadership, the charge begins to regain some of its momentum. They lead squads of soldiers through enemy lines, searching for weaknesses and pushing through. But even the Stannis soldiers fight with unmatched tenacity until their inferior numbers begin to show and gaps in their palisade form. These are breached and the battle becomes a slaughter. When the last of the resistance crumbles, Renly rides into the field, his golden armor streaked with mud and blood. He surveys the scene with a heavy heart. The ground is littered with the dead and dying, and the knights of Renly's army look little better.
Your Grace, Stannis is dead. We found him near the center, surrounded by his men. He fought to the end. And our losses? Stannis' men fought like demons. Many of our young knights, they fell in the trenches. Sir Loras was wounded, though he will live. That is where our losses are greatest. Those losses are regrettable. Damn Stannis for being too stubborn. Still, we should have no more problem reaching King's Landing. With the young wolf by our side, that should keep Lord Tywin busy.
Not all of Stannis' men fell in battle. Many hundreds were captured, including a few notable prisoners. Lord Montfort's, Valerian, Adrian Celtigard, Gilbert Faring, and Sir Davos Seaworth. There was also that strange red woman who joined Stannis in his negotiations. She is surrounded by a group of knights who proclaim themselves Kingsmen. Brienne and Catelyn feel unnerved by her presence and calm demeanor. There is also something unnatural about her. A chill runs down their spines, similar to how they felt when that shadow demon emerged.
Ah, yes, I remember you, my lady. Tell me, how did your one true king fare in battle? Or should I ask the dead?
Perhaps you could ask yours. It seems there are more of them.
Quick-witted. I can see why my brother was taken with you. Perhaps he did even realize you were a woman.
Your Grace, if I may suggest, I do not like the feeling of this woman. We should execute her now and be done with it.
Over our dead bodies. That was the plan. I agree with the wench. This woman is only a hindrance to our cause. On the contrary, she could be quite useful as a trophy. Let the people see how, for all my brother's preachings about restraint, he was taken just as much as any man. That should sway what few supporters he has. As for you, Sir Davos, I understand my brother was rather fond of you. If you offer the same loyalty to me as you did to him, then you shall be rewarded. After all, you are still helping a Baratheon sit on the throne. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but even without Stannis, the Lady Shireen is the true heir. I can see why Stannis favored you so much. Very well. I shall see to it the girl is taken care of. Perhaps even find her a suitable husband. She may even inherit Storm's End if she proves dutiful. As for sitting on the Iron Throne, as I have no heirs, it would seem fair to make her mine until a son is born to me. I suppose I don't have much choice.
Some of the other prisoners join Davos, though the Queen's men refuse, and many are slain for it. By morning, Renly's armies assemble in full. His infantry continues to advance down south, stretching for miles as they begin to march to King's Landing. Renly, resplendent in green and gold armor, flanked by his Rainbow Guard, take the lead. Behind him, tied to a cart like a caged animal, is Melisandre. She sits silently, her red robes soiled with mud, but she remains as dignified and impressive as ever. Renly makes sure she is paraded through the villages and towns, deemed the witch who corrupted Stannis. The story soon circulates that Renly heroically captured her to prevent his brother's influence from consuming the realm. Small folk gather to gawk at the spectacle, whispers of the righteous knight spreading like wildfire. Renly's host swells with every passing day as more lords and sellswords join his cause. By the time they reach the outskirts of King's Landing, his forces number nearly 80,000. The sight of his banners, Baratheon stags mingled with Tyrell roses, strikes fear into the defenders of the city walls. Renly wastes no time splitting his army in two. He sends 40,000 north to intercept Tywin Lannister, who retreats towards the Crownlands upon hearing of the advancing forces. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton and Edmure Tully muster their armies in the Riverlands to keep the pressure on Tywin, preventing him from trying to flee west. Renly, confident in his overwhelming advantage, focuses his efforts on the siege of King's Landing. His engineers construct trebuchets and battering rams, while his knights encircle the city to cut off all supplies. The golden banisters of the Lannisters still hang above the Red Keep, but morale within the city is low. Refugees from the surrounding countryside flood the gates, only to be turned away by the city watch. Renly's forces make a show of distributing bread and wine to the displaced, further solidifying his image as the savior of the realm. Meanwhile, out at sea, the Royal Navy is commanded by Sir Davos. They quickly capture Dragonstone in an assault led by Brienne of Tarth and Roland Storm. The two capture the castle and use it to begin their blockade of the city. As days turn to weeks, the pressure on King's Landing mounts. As the siege engineers rise, they begin to pound the city walls, slowly chipping away at the defenses of the city that begin to crumble down. However, the Lannisters do not simply remain behind the walls. They launch regular night raids and sorties against the enemy forces, burning supplies and siege equipment, or leading nighttime attacks. Hundreds perish in these assaults led by Sir Meryn, the Hound, and Mandon Moore. Sometimes they even carry pots of wildfire which they hurl into the enemy camps and siege engines. Several trebuchets go up in flames from these attacks, and they nearly succeed in bringing the camp to the ground during one attack. But while shocking, they do not break Renly's army, and the siege continues to drag on. By the third week, breaches begin to appear in the outer walls. Renly orders a final assault at dawn. The attack is swift and brutal. Trebuchets hurl flaming projectiles into the city, setting entire streets ablaze. Ladders and grappling hooks allow Renly's men to scale the walls. The gold cloaks and whatever forces the Lannisters have scraped together struggle to hold them back. It is a difficult battle as many lose their lives, especially those young knights eager for glory, and get carried away. But soon the banners of House Lannister are torn down and the gates are opened. The gold cloaks, outnumbered and leaderless, surrender in droves. Others, desperate to defend their homes, rush out to fight to the death. This leads to violent street-to-street fighting that claims many lives. However, at best, this only delays the inevitable. The real trouble comes as looters and deserters break off to sack the city. While Renly's bannermen work quickly to restore order, the king himself and Loras lead an assault into the Red Keep that breaks through the meager defenses. Cersei is found dead by poison, along with many court ladies who are executed by royal decree. Joffrey is found nearby, cowering, while his Kingsguard lay dead around him. Tyrion has already fallen, trying to rally the city's defenses. This leaves Renly alone with his bannermen as he eases himself onto the Iron Throne. A flicker of emotion crosses his face. Triumph, satisfaction, and something deeper. He ascends the dais, placing a hand on the throne's cold steel before turning to face the gathered lords and knights who have followed him to victory.
The realm has suffered under a false king long enough. The stag has claimed its rightful place.
Cheers erupt, filling the hall with deafening noise. Renly seats himself on the Iron Throne, his green cloak spilling over its jagged edges. Victory is his. But the war is far from over. By the next morning, King's Landing is secure, and Renly now begins his first official act as king, cleaning up the mess left by the Lannisters. The first thing to deal with is Joffrey. So long as he lives, there will be a threat to his rule, so Renly must ensure that he is taken out. Even as the city begins its rebuilding, Renly decides to send a strong message. Joffrey is to be taken to the Sept of Baelor. The square around it still a ruin and littered with corpses, as one more is about to join them. He motions for Ilyn Payne to drag the former king forward to the same spot where Ned Stark lost his head. He screams and thrashes, cursing Renly at first, but receives boos from the crowd. Renly reads from the same letter Stannis sent out, ironically, as well as all the crimes the king committed during his short but brutal reign. As he finishes this, Joffrey's expression turns to horror and is reduced to screaming and sobbing instead. But this doesn't do a thing. With one single swing of ice, the executioner takes his head. The crowd erupts in cheers as his head thumps down the steps. But this was just the first problem. The other was Tywin, who remained in the field. Thanks to Randyll Tarly's actions, he was able to prevent the Lion from the west from returning to the capital. Now it was only a matter of finishing him off. The remaining Lannisters are now making their way towards Duskendale, where they hope to find ships and flee back west. However, this is easier said than done, as Roose and Edmure's cavalry harass him at every point. Meanwhile, the Southern Army advances on their flank. Randyll wisely sends a small force ahead of the town, and convinces Lord Riker to throw his lot in with Renly. By the time Tywin arrives, he finds the gates closed to them. Though he tries to batter it down, Randyll advances to meet him. The fighting beneath the wall of Duskendale is brutal. Sir Gregor is sent out to raid and harass the vanguard, riding down many of Lord Tarly's men. Once their formation is disrupted, Adam Marbrand leads a flying column of heavy horses that crushes many unsuspecting men-at-arms underfoot. A third attack by Sir Flemont Brax throws them into chaos. This buys Tywin time to send Kevin out to hit the Riverlands and Northern Army. But all it truly does is buy them time. The advance is unstoppable, and soon the noose closes as the garrison of Duskendale hits them from behind, sending chaos through the Lannister army and preventing them from following up on their success. Soon the three armies converge on them, and the slaughter begins. With nowhere to go, men either yield, run, or fight to the death. This leaves their army in chaos, and soon dead Lannisters litter the field. Kevin, the Mountain, and many more are killed in the battle while Tywin is captured. His head is soon placed beside Joffrey and Cersei, while Gregor's head is sent to the Dornish as a gesture of goodwill. With the last major Lannister field army killed, Lord Rosby yields up Tommen, who is spared an execution. In truth, these talks are handled by Davin Lannister. They agreed that Tommen will renounce his claim to the throne. All lands taken by House Lannister will be returned to their previous lords, and prisoners are handed back. In exchange, Jaime Lannister will go free, and Tommen shall wed Renly Baratheon. It's a clever move that ensures their loyalty and still honors them, albeit an empty honor, as Shireen only rules Dragonstone. Meanwhile, Robb Stark will return north, now ruling over both the North and Riverlands with his title. However, he does swear fealty to Renly. In effect, he is a client state of the crown. Renly is happy to accept this, especially since it leaves Robb and Edmure responsible for most of the rebuilding and dealing with the Ironborn. But as the ink begins to dry, some men warn Renly of trouble. Sparrows. These are small folk and followers of the faith traveling along the land, demanding justice for the destruction. Some have already begun making their way to King's Landing. At first, Renly doesn't think much of them. With that, the war is over. Instead, he celebrates his wins and rewards his followers with feasts and tournaments outside the capital. All of these are incredibly decadent and paid for by Littlefinger, who wisely switches sides once it is clear the Lannisters lose. He is allowed to marry Lysa Arryn in the Vale. For several days, the greatest knights from across the Seven Kingdoms take part in this event. Not everyone approves of this policy, as Sir Davos notices that the people of King's Landing are still starving and believes, for the moment, austerity in a small court might show more understanding towards them. However, Renly brushes off this advice, reminding him that Robert was happy to hold these events during his reign, though Davos reminds him that those were during a time of peace and long summers. Still, the king gets his way and the tourneys are held. He says that they shall give the people hope and allow them to forget their troubles. The tourneys proceed, each event more extravagant than the last. The fields echo with the clash of lances and the cheers of the crowd. Lords and ladies place their bets, while knights display their prowess to win the king's favor. Renly watches with delight as Brienne unseats knight after knight in their lists, her stoic determination earning murmurs of admiration, even with her appearance. It makes for a delightful show. It is on the 4th day of the festivities that the High Sparrow arrives. He enters the tournament grounds barefoot and clad in simple robes, accompanied by a handful of equally plain followers, just as Sir Loras and Roland Storm are about to enter the tilts. He is immediately greeted with jeers and boos as the crowd orders him to move aside and let them joust, but he ignores them and approaches the king's dais. Renly raises a hand, silencing the commotion, and leans forward in his seat.
Well, this is a surprise. You must be the High Sparrow I've heard so much about. Have you come to swear fealty to your king, High Septim? I come not to swear fealty, your grace, but to warn you. The faith bleeds, and you sit here parading your sins before the realm.
Brienne steps forward, her hand on her sword, but Renly raises another hand to stop her. His smile remains, but a flicker of irritation crosses his face.
My sins? You'll have to be more specific, good Septim. I've heard the ill news of you and how you parade this heretic before the eyes of the people. An unbeliever who led your brother astray. Unbelievers like that are to be destroyed, not made into icons. All this while the faith burned in its septs, its followers slaughtered. Even now, when the wars are over and the people should be at peace, the people still starve. Beyond these grounds, the people are starving.
He gestures beyond the seating areas, toward the masses of small folk watching the tilts. They all go silent. While they were cheering on the fights earlier, many are gaunt and starving. No distraction can truly take that away.
Do you think the gods are blind to this decadence? Do you think they will bless a king who starves his people while he feasts? The septs were burned by the Lannisters and by Stannis' men, not mine. Melisandre was my brother's advisor, not my own. I parade her as a warning to those who allow themselves to be led astray. If you have come to cast blame, cast it at those who truly deserve it. And yet you spare her life when the gods demanded her blood. You parade her as a prize. Justice, your grace, is not a spectacle. Turn from this path, Renly Baratheon. End these feasts. Burn the heretic. And kneel before the Seven as a humble king. Or you may not hold your crown for long.
Enough. We shall not allow our king to be threatened in our presence.
Brienne the Blue steps forward, her hand on her sword. Beside her, Guyard Morrigan and Parman Crane stand ready.
You've said enough. Leave now, or you'll leave in pieces. I will leave. But my warning stands. The gods do not forget, nor do they forgive.
He turns and walks away, his followers trailing behind him. The crowd parts for them, whispers swirling like smoke in their wake. Soon, more begin to join him, hundreds of them who follow after him, moved by his speech. Renly returns to the tournament and orders that things continue as normal, though Sir Davos and Brienne notice this. After the event, they both begin sending men out into the streets to pay attention to what is happening. Unfortunately, things do not look good as the High Sparrow is riling up the people. He begins spreading stories of the sack of King's Landing, bringing forth victims who lost their homes and property to Renly's men. He urges the people to hold the king accountable and to put their faith in the Seven instead. Such actions could be considered sedation, but unfortunately, Renly knows that going after him would pose risks and risk further alienating the people.
Instead, he orders that no man is to lay an arm to the High Septim or his followers. They will let them perform their sermons. In response, though, Renly makes shows of importing food from the Narrow Sea and distributing them to Fleabottom. Marjorie is a great help here, as she hosts many charitable events, visiting these places and personally visiting the poorest of the poor. These help some people until more food can be brought from the Reach. However, the High Septim remains unimpressed and continues his protest. Marches, protests, and even demonstrations outside the Red Keep became all too common. This annoys the king to no end. Littlefinger observes all of this from the Vale, and sensing trouble, he fuels these rumors further by sending messages to the High Sparrow of rumors regarding Renly's unusually close relationship with Loras. He gives testimonies from servants, stories gathered by his spies. All of these inflame the disgust the High Sparrow has for Renly. He now begins to question Renly's legitimacy. While he might have the bloodline, he curses him and says his soul is corrupted through fornication and decadence, and even calls for the people to stand against him. That's our theory. If this video reaches 3,000 likes, we'll continue with part 2. So make sure to like. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the 7 kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.